Hey guys, welcome to another application session where we're going to talk about some of the most high yield stuff from the Psych 1 chapter of our content. Some of the biggest yield or the highest yield things in this chapter are going to be Piaget's stages of cognitive development, visual perception, including rods and cones, and also the wavelengths of light that we can see, and also some cognition kind of details. So heuristics is going to be a big thing from this chapter. So let's just jump right into it. I'm going to share my screen so we can see the PowerPoint. And John's also going to be here with me to make this more of like a discussion between two people who are pretty versed in the MCAT rather than just me talking the entire time. Welcome, John. All right.
Howdy, howdy. This is going to be kind of similar. It's going to take the place of the classroom sessions that most of you are used to. And if you're not enrolled in part of the IFD program, essentially the application sessions are where we take the time to review the high yield topics from a couple weeks back and teach the students how to actually apply those on the MCAT. So take it away, Max.
Cool. So the first high yield thing that we come to is signal detection theory. Signal detection theory gets kind of mixed up a lot in the content. I find a lot of students don't really understand what this is talking about. So think about it like this. Signal detection theory says that we can present a stimulus. We can have, someone can be wearing headphones and we can play a beep in their ear. And whether or not that stimulus is perceived by the person wearing the headphones, sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. And so that's all that signal detection theory is. So think about it in that way about, we can have different types of stimulus. We can have visual stimulus or kinesthetic stimulus, but think about it in the auditory way. That's the easiest way for me to think about it. Someone's wearing headphones, okay? We play a beep in their ear and they say, yeah, I heard the beep. That is a hit. I forgot I'm on my iPad. Hold on. That is a hit. If I play the stimulus, that means the stimulus is present, and I say, no, I didn't hear anything, that's a miss. That's a miss. All right. If I do not play, as the researcher, if they do not play the stimulus is absent, and I say, oh, I think I heard something, that's called a false alarm. That's just the verbiage, that's the wording that they use in the signal detection theory. If they do not play a sound and I say, yeah, I didn't hear anything, that's called a correct rejection. So don't get signal detection theory too mixed up. The way you're going to see this presented is basically, do you know what these words mean as far as whether the stimulus was present and whether or not it was perceived? John, do you have anything else to say about signal detection theory before I kind of go into, I think I have a question for it. No, I do not have a question for it.
Yeah, so just think of a good example for yourself. I mean, even something as simple as like the feeling your phone vibrating whenever you get a text message. I mean, it can vibrate and you can be like, oh, I got a text, and you check your phone and you have a text, and that'd be a hit. You could just miss it vibrating, and that would be a miss. Sometimes you feel like your pocket vibrated and you go to check your phone and you're like, that's weird, I don't have a message. And then any other time whenever you're not getting texted and you're aware that you're not getting texted, that would be a correct rejection. And so generally the way that the MCAT tests it is they give you a scenario and then they pretty much are like, well, what is this? And so you just have to interpret the scenario and say, oh, well, I see that the stimulus was present, but the perceiver did not, but the perceiver's response was, no, I didn't feel it. So that would be a miss. So that's usually kind of the way that it's tested on the MCAT, and that's the way that you should be learning it.
Yeah. I think about the headphones because I think about when I was in elementary school and they were checking our hearing, and that's exactly what they did. Like they put headphones on us and they played beeps in our ear and they said, press this button if you hear it. And I feel like I was just pressing the button the whole time. I was like, I'm going to have superhuman hearing, but definitely they were counting those as false alarms in my case because I was pressing the button, there was nothing there.
They're like, this girl is psychotic.
I
That's
think
why you
that's
had to go to all those
correct.
special classes.
Yeah, so think of your own example. That's the texting one is a good one. All right. The next thing that I want to talk about is a little bit about visual perception. The first things first is rods versus cones. If you don't know, rods and cones are they're the two types of photoreceptors that you have to know for the MCAT, both in your retina, but they have different roles as far as how they help you with your vision and how they process light as light comes through them. I tried to find a good picture of rods and a good picture of cones because I like pictures. It is like impossible to find a good picture of rods and cones on the internet. So, rods, they look like a literal rod in your eye, and then cones kind of look like that. So there's not a whole lot of difference, and they're both kind of on your retina as your eye goes around. If this is like the eyeball. Light comes through, hits them, kind of goes back up, and then goes down the optic nerve. But that's not what I want to cover here. What I want to cover here is the basics about what rods and cones do. So,
Maggie, do you mind if I cut in really quickly right there?
no, go ahead.
So it's important to understand that rods and cones are just a type of cell that's specialized. It's not a protein that you've secreted. They're just a specialized type of cell that happens to be in your eye. And so just like your fingernails are made to dig and protect the ends of your fingers, the cells that, well, I guess your fingernails are actually protein, so that's a bad example. But just like just like a cell within your pancreas, maybe its job would be to secrete. The photoreceptors, their job is to interpret these photons hitting them as visual stimuli and send that to the brain. So they're a type of cell, not a type of protein. I just wanted to make that caveat.
Yeah, absolutely. And that makes a lot of sense too, because these cells, rods and cones, they do have different proteins associated with them. And I put the protein that's associated with rods on here. You will not have to know the proteins associated with the different colors of the cones, but you will have to know that rhodopsin is the protein in rods that kind of helps them with their function. You don't have to know too deep about it. You just have to know rhodopsin rods. Some other things about rods that I think are important. Rods are going to be for your night vision. Um, when everything's really bright outside and you're seeing colors really well, that's not your rods that are going to be active. That's going to be more of your cones that are going to be active. Maybe I should do it like this. Yeah. So rods are for night vision, but also during the day when there is light and you have black and white stimulus, that's where rods also come in. I want y'all to think, I know I'm bouncing back and forth between rods and cones, but really it's because I'm trying to get y'all to compare them. Um, Cones have to do, I did my little color coding here. Cones have to do with your color vision. That's like the big thing about cones. It's color vision. So anytime you see a color, that's where your cones are activated. Also, visual acuity. So what does that mean? That means details. Fine lines. I can look off in the distance and see every little leaf on this tree outside. That's my cones that are helping me do that. Um, Whereas with your rods, they are more sensitive than cones. But don't think about that in the fact that they're sensitive to detail, because that's not the case. They're sensitive to light, more sensitive to light than cones. That's why we use them for night vision. There are a lot more rods than cones. There's 20 times more rods than cones. Um, but you have to know a little bit about where the rods and cones are found. And so, I'm going to draw an eye again right here. This is the iris. For some reason, I'm drawing it an upside down eye. This is the view path. Eyelashes, lower eyelashes. Okay. So, if this is our optic nerve kind of coming back through here, through our eye, we have a place in our eye in our retina specifically, called the fovea. You know, it's a little bit offset, just a little bit offset of the optic nerve. So, what is the fovea? I've kind of got it written out right here, so you know it has to do something with cones. The fovea is where there is a huge density of cones. Pretty much only cones are found in the fovea. No rods are found in the fovea. And so I'm going to write down here, I'm going to write cones. You know, I'll write fovea and then I'll write cones only. When we are looking out, you know, if I look straight out to this tree I was talking about earlier, and it's coming straight through my eye, the light is coming back and landing on my retina, it lands right on that fovea. So that's why I can see all those little details really well. If I'm looking at this tree and I try to look off to the left a little bit at this road sign, it's not as clear. You know, my peripheral vision is not as clear. And that's because that peripheral vision, you know, I have my tree and the light's coming straight through here. It's not drawn very straight. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just landing on my fovea and I'm trying to look at this road sign over here. And it's kind of coming like this. That's not landing on my fovea. It's landing on a place where there's a lot of rods. And so it's going to be a little bit blurry. And that's in my periphery. Surely I can, you know, move my eye a little bit to look straight at the road sign. And then those light rays are landing on my fovea and I can see the road sign really clearly and I'm using my cones and all that good stuff. But I really want y'all to focus on the fact that, you know, the fovea is a place of high density where there's a lot of cones, pretty much only cones. And the periphery of my eyes, my retinas, that's where there's a lot of rods.
There's a
All right.
really strong physics correlation here as well. So, and what I'm referencing is the idea of lenses. And so Maggie drew the light rays directly from the tree or the road sign to the fovea, but in reality, the cornea, the curvature of the cornea, and then the lens in your eye are going to be bending that light, right? And so whenever you look straight at something, the curvatures of your cornea and your fovea, if you don't need glasses, if you have glasses, then also of your glasses lens, they're all lining up to send those beams of light directly to the fovea, like Maggie's just drawn. But if you're looking off to the side of something, then it's not actually going to be the light rays aren't going to be diverging directly on the fovea. They are going to be diverging on the retina somewhere. Otherwise, you wouldn't really be able to see them very well. But they won't be diverging on the fovea. They'll be diverging on a higher density of rods. And so, while that almost sounds like a disadvantage, because like Maggie's pointing out, you cannot see it as clearly, it can be an advantage in, say, situations of low light, right? Because Maggie went over how, and I've actually seen this question on the MCAT before, so that's why I take the time to bring it up. If you are in the dark or you're in a low light situation and you need to see something, oftentimes you'll hear advice to not look directly at it, to look off of it a little bit, and it'll help you to actually see whether the presence or absence of that is there. And the reasoning behind that is because you are going to be having those light waves converge onto the other parts of your retina beside your fovea that are denser in rods, which means more likely to give you a hit. If you circle back to signal detection theory, more likely to give you a hit on recognizing your stimulus that's present.
Yeah, John, I think about, you know, if I'm stargazing or something, for some reason, it's like I find a star
How
that
often do you
looks,
do that?
huh? A lot,
How
surprisingly.
often do you stargaze?
Surprisingly, a lot. Um, I like astronomy. We both know this. So I'll be looking at a star and I'll see a star kind of in my periphery. And so I'll look over to that star and it's like suddenly I lose it. I think about that all the time. So I have to look kind of back off of it a little bit because it is that low light scenario when I'm
There
stargazing.
you go.
lot on a Tuesday.
Always thinking about the MCAT. I love it.
Always think, yeah, my mind never stops. Okay. I hope I've covered everything. There's a couple questions I know I put on these. And I'm gonna kind of I put this big long paragraph, but you really don't need to know this entire thing. And this is, the crux of the MCAT. Me and John have taken the MCAT for such a long time, we realize that this is the only thing you really need to know. We're examining CP, whatever the heck that is. I don't know, it has to do something with the rest of the passage. We're examining CP of color. So which impairment is least likely to interfere with the participants? Yeah. So John, you want to take this question? Knowing that we're talking about,
Yeah.
we're examining something about color.
Yeah, sure. Let me read it, and I'll kind of break it down to how we would view it. And I haven't taken this yet, so I might get it wrong, but Maggie will be here to catch me and patch me. It says, in a study examining CP of color, which is shown in study 1, whatever CP is, native English speakers were presented with the target color from the blue-green continuum. Okay, so we're in the visible light spectrum. After 5 seconds, they were shown the response options of 2 color patches, one of which matched the target color. They're asked to select the one that matched it. Okay, so they're going to show me a color, make me wait 5 seconds, and say, pick between these two. Participants' responses were significantly faster and more accurate when the response options belonged to different color categories than when they were from the same color category. So I guess they're saying you were faster if you were asked to pick between red and blue than if you were asked to pick between like purple and periwinkle. This finding occurred even when the difference in hues between cross-category options was equal to the difference in hues between within-category options. Okay, that makes me think that the within and cross-category thing was a passage information that we're missing. Which impairment is, okay, now we actually get to the real question. Which impairment is least likely to interfere with the participant's performance in study 1? Okay, so which of these is not going to hurt our performance? My performance is what? So you see how I'm asking myself questions as I break this question down to something simpler. My performance is the ability to distinguish between colors. So which of these is least likely to hurt my ability to distinguish between colors? And if I had to guess, I would say it's going to actually increase my ability, but let's see. Having significantly fewer rods than the average human. Rods don't really tell color, so it may not completely hinder my performance, but rods do help me see presence of light. So I'll say maybe to A, but I could see a better one. B says having significantly fewer cones than the average human. Well, if I don't have cones, I can't tell color. So probably B would hurt me. Maybe not B. C says having a lesion in the occipital. Okay, so now I'm going to cut the part of my brain that helps me interpret color. I think that would hurt my ability to interpret color. So I'll say maybe not. And then D says having a lesion in the fovea. Fovea is where the cones are centralized. And so if I have a lesion, aka you slice through the cells, those cones, yeah, they're not going to be working very well. They're not having a good day. So I say maybe not D, and I would go with A, because if I have fewer rods, which is just presence or absence of light, but I still have the same amount of cones, then I should be able to tell between different categories of color. A, final answer.
A, correct answer. Good job. Yeah, John broke this down perfectly. You would basically just asking, which of these doesn't have anything to do with color vision. Yeah. So you see how I'm talking about, John read the whole passage, which is good because you can kind of get a little bit of passage information, and you're going to get, you need to read the passage. I'm not saying that you don't need to read passages. What I'm saying here is that most questions don't require a whole lot of passage interpretation. This is a basic science question. We have to get a little bit about study 1. What is study 1? It's about color vision. That's my basic science. And now I can break this down to a simpler question. So A is the correct answer here. I think I have one more, and I'll take this one. It says, which statement explains why looking at a dimly lit object with peripheral vision at night results in the clearest image of the object? John already spoiled the answer to
I
this.
told you I had seen
I know.
it.
Yeah, when one looks to the side of an object, A says two images of the object are sent to the brain. Well, two images of an object are always sent to the brain because you got two eyes that see different things. But that has to do with binocular disparity. That doesn't really have to do with, the lighting of the scenario. So I'm going to say maybe not A. B says its image falls in the periphery of the retina, which is denser in rods. That's sounding tempting. We know that that's a true statement. And we know that that would be a reason why looking off to the side of a dimly lit object would help us see it clearer. So probably, or maybe B. C, its image falls on the fovea. Well, it doesn't. So I'm thinking maybe not, which results in the clearest image. Yes, the fovea gives the clearest image, but not in dimly lit scenarios. And so that's probably not the right answer. D, a single image of the object is sent to the brain, which results in a clearer image. We kind of already talked about this. You always get two images unless you close one eye. So that has to do with depth perception. That's not really, again, in nothing about light. So B, final answer. And because I made this PowerPoint, I know that B is the correct answer.
Notice how on the question you can tell that they're guiding you towards the idea of, hey, we're talking about rods here, because they're using adjectives like dimly lit. If the MCAT adds like these weird descriptive words that seem extra, it's on purpose. It's to test you on that.
Yeah.
So make sure you're paying attention to that stuff.
You see that a lot on psych soc because we describe the MCAT as kind of a shallow ocean, but I've told every student I've tutored that psych soc is even broader and even more shallow, and so they have to kind of guide you with these cue words. As long as you can kind of get those cue words, you can get a lot of these theories and stuff correct without I want you to have a conceptual understanding, but sometimes the keywords are really good to help you get the right answer. All right. The next kind of thing, and the last thing I want to talk about visual perception, at least for this chapter, is the visible light spectrum. This comes up a lot in physics, actually, but it was covered in the Psych Social 1 chapter, so I want to cover it here. You have to know what the visible light spectrum is. And what I mean by that is these values right here, 400 to 700 nanometers. That is the wavelength that we can see. Wavelength of light. Wavelengths of light come in all kinds of different sizes. They can go, from, what is this? To the -12, is that femto?
Picometers.
Picometers. They can go from picometers, they can go, to nanometers, and then, micro, milli, and then they can go up to like kilometers. Can you imagine an entire kilometer sized wave? But that's what radio waves are. And so you have to know a little bit about, not necessarily like what wavelength the gamma ray is, but you kind of have to know the order. So, it goes from gamma rays to X-rays to UV to that very small little chunk that we can actually see, that visible light spectrum. Then on the larger wavelength side of it, we get infrared, then microwaves, then radio waves. So know the order a little bit of the ones that I have pointed out here. Wouldn't necessarily say you got to know anything about cosmic rays or broadcast band waves. But know the visible light spectrum. They will get you on this visible light spectrum a lot. And these are pretty easy questions because they will just, they will bring up some, there was, I think in private tutoring a couple weeks ago, we had a question about the visible light spectrum. Basically, it said that the laser was visible in the passage, and that was the only clue that we had to the wavelength of the laser. And then the question asked, what wavelength could the laser be? And then they gave us a bunch of different values, and only one value was in the visible light spectrum. And so that was the crux of the question. And that's how this visible light spectrum is often going to be tested on the MCAT. I don't think I have a question. Oh, I do. Okay, I think I have two questions actually. I don't remember. John, do you have anything else to say about this?
No, I think you covered it well. I mean, there is like some E equals HF
Mm-hmm.
correlates and the relationship between wavelength, frequency, and speed of light and stuff like that. But those are better covered in a different section.
Agreed.
Like
Um,
whenever we're going over the CP correlates of light. So we'll cover that at a later date.
yeah, certainly. Um, so John, do you want to take this? It's the exact same thing that you read earlier. So
Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's the exact same little prelude. The stimuli used in study one most likely vary in which physical dimension? So, what changes colors? What characteristic about light changes the color? Does the wavelength? Yep, that's all that does it. So A's looking good. And keep reading. B says amplitude. Nope, that's just talking about intensity. C says purity. I don't believe that that's an actual physical dimension. D says brightness. Brightness could be referencing intensity from the source or perceived brightness. But regardless, it's dealing with more of like the um, like a rods question rather than colors and cones. So I go with A.
and A is correct. I know a lot of times these questions they seem so easy because we've just gone over the material, and the hardest part about these questions is figuring out what they're even asking. But you know, here it's going to be asking about the visible light spectrum. That's one reason we decided to kind of record these sessions and everything because we want to show y'all how they are tested. These subjects are tested, um, but in a way that you guys don't feel like it's oversimplified, if that makes sense. Like you guys still feel like I don't know, like you're getting an accurate viewing of what an MCAT question would be like. Because I think this was on one of the double AMC, the sample at test or something like that. So this is a good question to ask you guys, but I know that it seems a lot easier when we've just gone over the material.
Yeah, I actually remember this passage being really hard.
Yeah.
It's easy now that we're going over it, but whenever I mean, you can see just this little excerpt of the passage that Maggie's clipped, how wordy and confusing it is. And you have two professional MCAT tutors that are breaking it down and saying, oh, we're just talking about color here. So what's the difference in the colors? I mean, once you get down to that, you dang sure better get the question right. Like it's really easy then. But the hard part of the MCAT is obviously breaking it down or understanding the passage well enough to see that hey, we're just talking about color and color perception, and then being able to simplify that question. And so that's what we have the other videos on the channel for, as far as the instructions on how to simplify that question and how to interpret passages. So.
Exactly. All right, here's the highest yield thing. I would say one of the most high yield things in psych soc. Um, I see it on every test, probably more than once, which is pretty rare for psych soc stuff. This is Piaget's stages of cognitive development. I left off the word cognitive, but it is important that it's cognitive because there are other types of development that are talked about in psych soc. But Piaget did his work in cognitive development. So what do you got to know here? I really like this little graph I've put up here. And why do I like it? It gives me the name of the stage. This is stage, 1, 2, 3, and 4. But what you really got to know is the name of them. Sensory motor. That's the stage that your brain is developing in when you are a newborn to when you're about 2 years old. What does that mean? It means that you are mostly relying on the sensation that you get from the world and your motor skills. You're working on your motor skills. And so you have, you're coordinating those together. The only language that you use are from demand and cataloging, milk or food or poopy or whatever you're saying when you're a 2-year-old. The thing I like about this graph, John's still saying that stuff. The thing I like about this graph is it tells you the milestone that you developed. That's important for the sensory motor stage and the preoperational stage. You develop a milestone when you hit those. By the age of 2 years old, you should have developed object permanence. I'm not going to go too much into what object permanence is. That's a different topic, but it's important that you guys can be shown a question that says basically this kid is able to know that his mom exists even though his mom is not in the room. What stage has this child mastered? That would be the sensory motor stage. We're given a clue. That child has developed object permanence because he knows his mom exists even when she's not in his line of view. That means he has achieved that milestone. That means he has matured past the sensory motor stage.
Another really good example of that we do a lot is peekaboo. Playing peekaboo with the kid. The reason peekaboo is so fun with like a really young child is that whenever you put like your hands over your face or your Bible over your face or something at church, they literally think you're gone. Like they're like, dang, their Uncle John's just gone. It was nice knowing him. But then you pull it back and they're like, what a freaking wizard. This guy's a champ. He's so fast. So object permanence, though, if you'll notice that it's not as fun to play peekaboo with like a 18-month-old as it is with a 3-month-old. And that's because they're developing this object permanence. So they know that you put that Bible over your face, or just because they can't see you doesn't mean that you're not there. It just means that something else is in front of your face. And so, yes, 0 to 2 years is when you develop object permanence, but that doesn't mean that it has to happen at 2 years, right? Like it's not like you hit this on your second birthday and then congratulations, now we're chasing conservation, but you're only going to get that your 7th birthday. It's not how it works. It's just the age range on average that it occurs within. And the age ranges are very important. Those will get tested on the MCAT as well. They may give you an example of object permanence like Maggie just pointed out, and instead of saying what stage is this child going through, they'll say, how old is she?
Yeah.
And you have to click 0 to 2 years.
Mm-hmm. I think I gotta I have a question in a little bit that basically gives you the age of the child and then it asks you for their likely stage that they're in. So yeah, be able to, know pretty much everything in this little graph I have right here. The stage name, the age range, the common description, just some keywords there, and then the milestone. We don't have like a real good milestone during the concrete operational and the formal operational. We do, but it's not tested on the MCAT really. That's more of just like a psychology class kind of thing, that you'd have to know for that.
Ooh, what is it?
So for formal operational, it's basically like abstract thought. Like I can have hypothetical scenarios now, and concrete operational. Um, I don't know. I don't really remember the milestone for that.
I guess it's the understanding of like time, space, and quantity.
Yeah, probably. So pre-operational is the next stage, and that's 2 to 7 years old. And you guys can read through this chart. I'm not going to go through it too much, but I do want to talk about the milestone, and that's conservation. What that means is I'm going to draw the common example here. I have a cup of water, and it's 400 milliliters. And then I have this cup of water. It's a different shape, but it's also 400 milliliters. If you ask a kid that has not mastered conservation which one has more water in it, and you'll be like, hey, kid, these both have 400 milliliters of water in it, or these both have 1 cup of water in it. Which one has more water in it? They will always say the taller one. That is just the way that their brains work. They have not mastered that yet. You can even take let's see. How do they do this usually? I think they take 2 glasses of water. Here's what they do. I remember now. They take 2 glasses of water that look exactly the same, and then they pour one of them. They do all this in front of the kid. They pour one of them into an empty glass that's shorter and stout. And so now the water moves over here. They will do all this in front of the kid. And they'll say, which one has more water? The kid will still say this one. It's like, you are so dumb. Like, how do you not get this? Like,
Stupid.
yeah. But once they master that milestone of conservation, they'll be able to say, okay, I understand that even though, this one is shorter, it is wider, and so it holds more water than it looks like, and so these have the same amount of water in them. um, that's the milestone for the pre-operational stage, 2 to 7 years.
So Maggie is kind of like our resident psychology master. She's really good at psych. I'm really good at physics, and then we just kind of BS our way through the rest. I'm kidding. We've got them down. But so I want to ask you: do you think that that's the same reason why if a kid has a dollar bill and you have like 20 nickels, and you're like, "Hey, I'll trade you $1 for 20 nickels," they'll always be like, Psh, I am robbing you blind. Give me the nickels. Give me all 20 of them. Do you think that that's why, or do you think that I mean maybe that's like a math thing?
No, that's the same thing. They would give that example sometimes in our psych classes, of the money as well. The common example is the water jugs, but they also gave that example of money, so it's a good application of it. And stealing money from a baby or whatever, maybe that's why it's so easy.
Yeah, maybe. So if you're gonna steal from a child, make sure they're between the ages of 2 to 7.
Yeah.
So, but as far as the MCAT goes, I've literally never seen conservation brought up
Hmm.
unless it's the water example.
Yeah. Agree. So concrete operational, basically you can think concrete thoughts, space, time, and quantity are understood. That kind of goes back to the conservation thing. You kind of understand how things work as long as they are like right in front of your head, or it's a scenario that has played out in the past. As far as formal operational goes, you can think about like what ifs. You can think about hypothetical scenarios, and you can start to kind of move things around in your head spatially. So, yes, it says strategy and planning become possible. That's kind of once you get past 11 or so, you can start thinking about those kind of formal operational things. Um, Definitely be comfortable with Piaget's stage of development, especially those first two, I would say.
And you don't have to memorize the descriptions word for word.
No.
The important thing is just knowing kind of what, like if you see formal operational, you need to be able to think, okay, well, we can kind of think out of the box. I can do algebra. I can think about questions like, did anybody make, like, who made God? I can think of difficult questions like that I couldn't fathom doing in the pre-operational stage. And so, it's important to think of like sensory motor. I'm working on just figuring out how to move my arms and stuff in my environment, and just short descriptions like that are probably going to be a better tool for you rather than trying to remember this verbatim. But there are some things you have to remember verbatim, and that's the stage name, the age range, and then the milestones, which Maggie circled one. Will you circle object permanence as well?
Yeah.
And that should be the only 2 milestones, and that's the only 3 things that you have to like hardcore memorize, and then the rest should just be examples of what these things really are. So
Mhm. Um, so here's a question. Did you took the last one? I'll take this one. Levels of morbid obesity are rising throughout the Western world. This increase has been attributed to easy access to high caloric foods and the advertising of those foods to children, particularly between the ages of 5 to 7 years old. Blah, 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 blah.
What?
What?
Who advertises to a 5 to 7-year-old?
A kid's meal, dude.
I guess, yeah.
Or
That
those
stuff's
little
dummy
go-go
thick. I
snacks.
had one the other day. I had like 4.
Huh?
Those little what? The fruit snacks?
The
Yeah, fruit
little like
snacks.
squeezy apple juice
Solid.
thing. It's basically wet sand.
Ew. High calorie wet sand. Sounds like something you give cancer patients.
um, so it says, this is the beginning of the passage, and so it goes on more to talk about morbid obesity. But basically, we're given a hint here: 5 to 7 years old. So the question says, according to Piaget's theory, in what stage of cognitive development are the children who are targeted by advertisements for high caloric foods? 5 to 7 years old is in the pre-operational stage. That was the 2 to 7-year-old range. So the answer here is going to be C. As you get to this question, if you were really taking the MCAT, you would have an entire passage about morbid obesity that would be straight on your mind. So when you got to this question, you'd be like, what the heck? I don't know. All I know is about, how cruel capitalism is and how everybody's fat now. But really, you got to bring it back to there must have been a hint somewhere in the passage. And it's this 5 to 7-year-old thing right here. It's this one little clue in the first sentence of the passage, second sentence, sorry. So the answer here is going to be C, pre-operational. This is how you see Piaget's tested pretty much all the time. Would you agree, John?
Yes. Some variation of this. They're going to give a clue in the passage, and like Maggie said, it's not going to be obvious. The passage is not going to be about Piaget's theories. They're just going to give something subtle like this. However, if you're an IFD student, then you're doing the flowchart method, so you will have already written that down. You have already thought about this question. We haven't introduced that strategy yet on YouTube. It's called foreshadowing, but it's there. So this won't surprise you once you're really ready for the exam. But yeah, this is how it's usually tested. Is I'm going to drop one of those 3 hardcore memorization type things on you, and I'm going to ask you which one it lines up with.
Yeah. All right. Next thing I want to talk about is a little bit about cognition, and I'm kind of going to pass the ball to John here, and I'll be honest because this is like something, even sitting on the MCAT, I could barely tell you the difference between availability and representative heuristics. So John, can you shed some light on maybe what heuristics are and the difference between these 4 common heuristics that I've kind of pulled out? I'm going to write as you talk.
Yeah. So a heuristic is essentially you if you look up the definition for a heuristic, it'll say, oh, it's a rule of thumb, which kind of ticks me off because that's an analogy in a definition, and which doesn't make any sense. But what it is, a heuristic is a way that our brain will create mental shortcuts so that we can speed up decision-making processes. Like I'm not, I really like to eat healthy. And so I don't go in my pantry every morning and be like, what am I going to eat? I have all these foods. I'm not deciding between oatmeal, ramen, pasta, and like broccoli and all this stuff for breakfast. I'm like, hey, I'm eating breakfast. So my heuristic is there are only a certain amount of breakfast foods that I'm going to eat, right? So that's what a heuristic is. It's this, like Maggie just wrote, it's a cognitive shortcut. It's something that our brain does to save energy so we don't have to critically think about a billion different tasks that we do throughout the day. And so we use them all the time. They're very good. They can get to the point where they're detrimental if you're relying on heuristics rather than thinking. But they are all together a good thing because they increase problem solving, but they can decrease accuracy, just like Maggie wrote. So the difference between the availability heuristic and the representative heuristic. The availability heuristic means that you are answering a question with the first thing that comes to your mind, the first example that comes to your mind. Whereas the representative heuristic is going to be relying on a prototype as your heuristic. And so let me give you a good example. I want you to think about your childhood dog. Okay, Maggie and I were related. We're brother and sister, and so we had the same childhood dog. We had multiple ones, but let's talk about Tyson. Um, Tyson stunk. I don't know why, but he did. But Tyson, if I'm to say, if someone says dog to me, think of a dog. I'm going to say availability heuristic is probably going to be Tyson because that was my childhood dog for the longest, and he was a really, really good dog. I really like Tyson. Maggie can do the same thing. So that's our availability heuristic. However, if someone says, or I'm sorry, however, whenever someone tells you, think of a dog, you don't think Tyson, right? Like that'd be weird if you were like, oh, John and Maggie's dog Tyson, that's who I think of. That's weird. That's not going to be the first dog you think of. You're probably going to think of like your childhood dog, or if you didn't have one, and you're probably going to think about how upset you are with your parents for not getting you a childhood. No, I'm just kidding. But you'll think of something that's relevant to your life. A representative heuristic would be if we were to, someone says, think of a dog, and we think of like a famous dog. So like Scooby-Doo or Pluto from Mickey Mouse, or Marley and Me, the dog, or the dog from Where the Red Ferns Grow, or I can go on and on if we want to cry. But that's really the difference. And so on the MCAT, availability heuristic, you're going to see something, kind of the priming word that Maggie talked about, that will tell you is you're going to see something that's referencing speed. So it's going to say, it immediately popped into your mind. It was the first thing you thought of, or they quickly remembered. So availability heuristic deals with really, really speed, focusing on speed. Representative heuristic, you will see the word prototype usually, or you will see like a word like typical. And so be looking out for those things.
John, this reminds me of, what is it called? Is it the typicality effect or something like that?
Versus familiarity,
Yeah,
typicality versus familiarity. Yeah, they're kind of similar.
yeah. That's another psych-soc topic. It's kind of, I don't know, it's really related,
It's
but
low yield.
low yield. Yeah,
Yeah, it's low yield, so we're not gonna touch it.
yeah. But it reminds me of the representative heuristic, I guess. Keep going.
So confirmation bias is whenever you place higher importance on information that supports what you already believe. And belief perseverance is whenever you choose to ignore credible information that does not agree with you, and you continue in your belief. It's actually pretty self-explanatory, right? So like I persevere my belief. So even though you're really proven wrong, you will continue to believe in your set way. It's just like I have a really good story about this. My buddies and I, we argue all the time about which chicken sandwich is best. And I have one of my buddies, is he just hates on Chick-fil-A. I don't know why. I think he thinks it's cool, but he rags on Chick-fil-A all the time. And so I finally got ticked off enough to where I was like, all right, I'm just gonna buy like 16 sandwiches, and we're gonna blind taste test all of them. And so we did, and he ranked all of them, and he actually ranked Chick-fil-A's number one, even though he talked about how horrible it was. Like he bit into it, he was like, "Oh man, this is this is so good. It's like the bread, the chicken has so much flavor." I could have freaking thrown up when I found out it was Chick-fil-A's, but Even then, though, even afterwards, and now we'll call him or text him randomly and be like, "Hey, man, I know if you're hungry, but I'm about to go to Chick-fil-A or something like that." He will still be like, "Dude, Chick-fil-A sucks. They just had a good day." I'm like, "You're crazy, man." So that's what belief perseverance would be: is if even in the face of credible evidence, you still continue in your belief. That is what belief perseverance would be.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Heuristics were a hard thing for me. I kind of understood confirmation and belief perseverance. It was just the availability and the representative heuristic that always tripped me up. So find a good way to memorize those and find ways that they are tested. I searched high and low and I couldn't find a question that asked about availability or representative heuristic that you guys aren't taking on an FLE in the future. I didn't want to spoil that question for you, so I didn't want to bring those into the mix. That means I couldn't find them in the information, the sources, the resources that I was using. So I have this one from the internet, and I'll let John take it here because he took it earlier, and I thought he had a good explanation for it.
Alrighty. A doctor, all of us in a few years, develops a theory of disease etiology. She decides that her research findings, while equivocal, most likely support. What does equivocal mean?
Like equal, I think.
But unequivocal means. Hold on. Well, unequivocal is like a good thing. So equivocal, I would think maybe that means like controversial. I don't know. But they most likely support her theory. However, subsequent independent testing does not confirm. Oof, some drama. And in fact, it refutes her findings. Gasp. She never wavers in her support for her theory. You see this? She's been proven wrong, and she's still like, no, I don't like it. Stupid research. She never wavers in her support for her theory. So we're looking at a little bit of belief persistence right there. Even though over time findings from most other studies refute it. Which factor relevant to cognitive decision making likely produced the doctor's belief that her findings support her theory? Okay, so let's see. And which factor accounts for her insistence that her theory is correct despite the evidence, despite the adverse evidence? So these are two different questions. Let's take them one at a time. Which factor, let's see, relative to cognitive decision making, that's fluff, so I'm not going to read it. Which factor produced the doctor's belief that her findings support her theory, that her equivocal, which I guess means controversial theories, most likely support her theory? Well, she was probably looking for something that's going to confirm her theory, right? She's probably giving more attention to the findings that go in line with what she thinks, which is human. She's not a bad person. See, and which factor accounts for her insistence that her theory is correct despite the evidence? So let's go ahead and go through these. So A says availability heuristic. So my first question is, does that, the availability heuristic, could that explain me, could that explain, could that produce the doctor's belief that her findings support her theory? Availability heuristic is more about the speed of process. So heuristics are more about processes rather than interpretation of new data. So I don't really like that at all. I hate its guts. B would be belief persistence. I don't like belief persistence to answer this first question because it is we haven't been given the counter evidence yet, so I don't like that one. C says confirmation bias, though. I do like confirmation bias, right? Because the doctor, it says, even though her research findings were equivocal, and they most likely support her theory. Okay, so that means that she is selecting, or she could be selecting for material or content. Gosh, content. I've been talking about the MCAT too much. She's probably placing higher importance on the research that supports her findings. And so that would be confirmation bias. And the second question says, which factor accounts for her insistence that her theory is correct despite the evidence? that's belief perseverance all day, right? Like, even though you're proving me wrong, I'm going to persevere and stick my head in the sand and just believe in spite. We all do it all the time, but that is belief perseverance, and the correct answer would be C.
Correct. Good explanation there. Yeah. All right. I think this is the most popular image of type 1 and type 2 error in the world. But it's a good one. So, what is type 1 versus type 2 errors? So, this kind of gets into the research methods half of psych soc here. And what we're talking about here is errors that you can make when interpreting results, usually results of research. So, a type 1 error would be like where you say, oh, I see the results that I want to see, but they're not actually there. So in this case, this doctor is saying, yeah, he's looking, if you're saying that this doctor is looking for someone to be pregnant, this doctor is saying, yeah, absolutely, you're pregnant, but this is an adult man and he doesn't even look bloated. So in no way, shape, or form is this person pregnant. The doctor is saying, yes, or the researcher is saying, yes, I see the results I wanted, but the results are in fact not actually there. It's a false positive. Whereas a type 2 error is exactly the opposite. It's saying, oh, I don't see the results I wanted to see. My research did not pan out. My hypothesis was not supported. When in fact, you must have overlooked something because it is there. You do see the results. Your hypothesis was supported. This woman is very pregnant, even though she looks like 50 years old. It's a high risk pregnancy, I would say. But it's a false negative. And so keep these straight in your head. This is kind of like going back to signal detection theory. These are not the same thing as signal detection theory, but you just kind of got to know like what's a type 1 error and what's a type 2 error, because they're going to give you a scenario and then one of the answer choices is going to be like type 1 error or type 2 error or confirmation bias or something else, like, and then it'll give you two random things. John, you got anything else to say about this?
No, I think that meme says it all.
Yeah, honestly. I don't have an example here because I think it's kind of like signal detection theory. I think you kind of get the point, and they're pretty straightforward. But I did want to talk about some class representatives of drugs. I don't think that this is super high yield. I think this is about mid yield, but I do want y'all to know some of the biggest drug representatives of the class. And so when I say the class, I'm talking about, is it a stimulant? Is it a depressant, a cannabinoid, a psychedelic, or an opiate? And when I say the representatives, I mean cocaine is a stimulant. That's probably going to be your most popular stimulant that you get on the test. And so the way that this often gets tested, because I don't think I do have a question, but it doesn't really do a good job. The way that this often gets tested is it will tell you like, hey, there's increased dopamine in the system, or there's a stimulant effect. What drug is this person most likely taking? And you'll have to pick out of cocaine, alcohol, psilocybin, and heroin. And you'll be able to pick cocaine because of this application session. Other common stimulants would be methamphetamine or any other amphetamine, things like Adderall, Ritalin, those are amphetamines, and they're stimulants. They increase your central nervous system activity. Another thing that I want y'all to know about some of these drug classes, because it's often threaded into the question as well. Stimulants have to do with an increase in dopamine in your central nervous system, in your brain. That's a neurotransmitter. So always tie together stimulants, increase in dopamine, and then one of these representatives. Usually, if you can remember all of these, that would be good. But cocaine is probably going to be your most popular one that gets tested. Same thing with depressants. What depressants do is they kind of, it's self-explanatory. They depress your immune system. I was just watching a video on HIV, so I think that's why I just said that. But they depress your central nervous system activity. And how do they do this? They increase GABA. Hold on. They're increasing a neurotransmitter which depresses your central nervous system. Why is that? Because GABA is inhibitory. It is your main inhibitory neurotransmitter. Know that. Um, Probably your most common depressant that you see on the MCAT. Actually, I would say it's about 50-50 between alcohol and benzodiazepines like Xanax. A lot of anti-anxiety medicines are depressants, which makes sense, right? You want to, if your anxiety, you're up here, you need to be lowered down a little bit. Cannabinoids, these are not highly tested, but that would be basically THC, marijuana, those kinds of things. The way that cannabinoids work is it's a big mix of neurotransmitters. It's got a little bit of everything. And so they don't normally ask you about neurotransmitters when they're talking about cannabinoids. Honestly, I don't think I've ever picked cannabinoids as an answer on an MCAT. They're mostly not worried about it, but I wanted to put it on here just so y'all knew what it was and don't get tripped up and pick the answer that is something that you don't know. Because I know that some people do that. They'll be like, I don't know what C is, and so I'm going to pick it. I have done that too. Don't do it. Psychedelics. Psilocybin, I believe, is the thing in shrooms. John, do you know? Something like that?
No, I don't know.
No. I think
It
it is.
sounds right, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not a big druggie.
I mean, me neither, but I probably should know these. But I think psilocybin is the thing in shrooms. So you might see that more commonly. You're going to see LSD as the class representative for psychedelics. The way that these work is they usually increase serotonin. They have a couple other effects on other neurotransmitters, but really the representative you're going to want to think about is increasing serotonin. And then opiates or opioids, you're going to see heroin and morphine as your representatives, and they increase endorphins. Another thing you should know about opiates or opioids is that they decrease pain. So that's why we give them, that's why they're painkillers. Morphine or I don't know, there's a lot of drugs out there that are opiates, the opioid crisis, the painkiller crisis, whatever. Johnny, got anything?
So if you've taken yes, if you have taken pharm or something like the pharmacology or something like that, you may be like, oh, they're so stupid, like they're not even touching on everything. Like, yes, most of these drugs will have a small impact on other neurotransmitters. You're really not going to touch dopamine without slightly impacting serotonin a little bit, right, Max?
Right.
But um, what we have put are going to be the ones that you should be concerned with. They're the ones that are most impacted. They're what the results or the behavior from taking these drugs is usually elicited from. And so this would be like the high yield neurotransmitter that you would need to know. And that principle of, we kind of we teach what you need to know and not everything about it. That's going to occur throughout the entirety of studying with IFD for the MCAT, because I know that there are more than 20 amino acids. I know that there's more than 20 amino acids in the body. Trust me, I know. But there's only 20 that are tested on the MCAT. So I'm not going to make you memorize selenocysteine if it's not going to be tested on the MCAT. And so that's same thing here. So if you're thinking that we're wrong, this is incomplete, but it's purposefully incomplete to not overwhelm you, to just give you what you need to know to get the questions right on the MCAT, and let you worry about memorizing all the actual amino acids and the specific ins and outs of things like the TCA cycle and the urea cycle once you get in med school. We'll kick that can down the road a little bit.
Yeah. And I want to be clear, like we're not treating y'all like you're dumb. This is pretty much this is mostly what I know. I have a bachelor's in psychology, and this is pretty much all I know about these drugs. I may know a little bit more, but
Oh
that's
yeah.
from my psychology classes. Like, what we teach y'all is pretty much what we know because that's what we were taught for the MCAT. And that's what we've seen on the dozens of tests that we've taken. So we're not dumbing it down. This is a lot of stuff. We got to cut some of the fat. You know what I mean?
It
Oh,
was dumbed down for us, and it
yeah.
worked, and so that's what this is.
Thank God, too, because I could not handle all of it.
Thank God. Yep, that's right. I couldn't memorize all that stuff.
Mm-mm. Um, I'll take this one. It says researchers hypothesize that cocaine is pharmacologically active in the. This is from a passage, by the way, but you didn't need to know really any passage information. Cocaine is pharmacologically active in the primate fetal brain when pregnant primates are administered cocaine at doses typically used by human drug users. Which experimental observation best supports their hypothesis? All right, that is a question. I'm going to simplify it down a little bit, or at least try. So we're told, these
However,
research.
if you're watching this video, sorry, Max, if you're watching this video, pause it and try to simplify this first,
Yeah.
and then listen to Maggie's simplification and see the drastic difference and also how much easier the question gets for you.
Mm-hmm.
So take it away, Mood.
All right. So these researchers, they think that cocaine is pharmacologically active. Okay, they think cocaine is being used in this fetal primate brain when pregnant primates are given cocaine. Which one of these answer choices is going to display that? So, which one of these answer choices looks like there's cocaine in these fetuses' brains? I mean, that's about as simple as I'm going to get it because I only got a minute to answer the question. A, glucose metabolism in the fetal brain increased. Okay, so what would make glucose metabolism increase in the brain? That would be, things like stress, things like thinking a lot, things that increase your central nervous system activity. If your central nervous system activity, your brain cells, your neurons are working harder, they're going to need more glucose. So I would think that cocaine being in my brain would probably make my central nervous system go up here. It would probably increase glucose metabolism. I can make those small logical steps. And so I'm going to say, well, A sounds okay. I don't know for sure. I don't know anything about fetal cocaine use, but I can make those steps based on the basic sciences that I know about what cocaine does to the brain and what glucose metabolism has to do with the brain. B, imaging studies showed that cocaine entered the fetal circulation. Certainly that's going to show us that, cocaine's getting to these fetuses, but is it going to show that it's pharmacologically active in the fetal brain specifically? Because, there's a huge barrier called the blood-brain barrier that separates our circulation from actually, drugs actually going into our brain. So B sounds like the answer that everybody wants to pick. It's a pretty answer. We see images that cocaine's literally getting into the fetus, but we have to draw that line somewhere, and that line is the blood-brain barrier. And so I'm not sure if it's really pharmacologically active in the brain. So I'm gonna say maybe not on B. C, the fetus had an increase in tolerance to pain. This is if cocaine in the question stem was heroin instead, C would be the right answer. Whatever, if I had replaced it with opiates, C would be the right answer. But because it's a stimulant, stimulants don't really have to do with pain tolerance as far as the MCAT goes. And so I'm thinking C is probably not the right answer. D, imaging studies showed increased internalization of dopamine receptors. When I took this question literally like an hour ago, I didn't really understand what that meant. And I'm going to be honest, I'm still not 100% sure what it meant. And I read the solution text and I still don't know. But basically, what I was thinking of and the reason why I picked A was because I understood what A was saying, and I felt like it was a true statement that could actually happen. And D, saying that we have an internalization of dopamine receptors, that sounds to me like we're not having them being used or something, that we're, I don't know, metabolizing them. I'm not really sure what it's trying to say. John, do you understand what it means by internalization of dopamine receptors?
Not at all, which is kind of like you, why I would avoid it. I mean, I guess it's saying like um, the word that's catching me up is internalization,
Mm-hmm.
but increased receptors. There's nothing. Even if we saw this as it just increases the number, the sheer volume. There's nothing about cocaine that would increase the number of receptors. You just increase what's binding to them.
Mm-hmm. Um, yeah. So, and especially because after a certain point of drug use, after repeated drug use, our brains do upregulate receptors. But I'm only given evidence that we've really given administered cocaine like once to these primates, or like not for a long period of time, that these fetuses would have developed upregulation or would have developed a tolerance or a withdrawal effect. And also, I'm getting caught up as well, John, with internalization. I don't really understand what that means, but it doesn't really sound right. Certainly, dopamine receptors, that is what cocaine acts on. Um, but I don't think an increase in internalization would really point to cocaine in the brain, whereas A would.
Yeah, I think this is name dropping, which is a
Yeah.
strategy we haven't shown you all yet. But name dropping is basically the idea that they will mention a word or a fact or something like that that is familiar from the passage or from like a classic basic science, and then they will use it to make an incorrect answer choice really enticing.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that cocaine works with dopamine, and so we're looking for an answer choice that says dopamine, and so they give us D as the incorrect answer choice, but to make it attractive, they use the word dopamine, whereas the correct answer is glucose metabolism in the fetal brain increases. And we never think, you will never, even in med school, learn about how cocaine increases glucose metabolism. You're just having to put the pieces together, right? Like cocaine's a stimulant. If you're excited, if you increase CNS activity, well, you're probably going to consume more carbohydrates, more glucose.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So A is the correct answer here. Um, yeah. The last thing I want to cover is again something that's not, it's mid yield, but they're easy questions. And so I think last week I showed y'all reactive oxygen species. That was also not a high yield topic, but they're easy questions, and I want y'all to get them. That's EEG patterns for sleep stages. This is, you're never going to have to interpret an EEG for the MCAT, so don't worry about that. What I want y'all to worry about is the names. Where am I? Right here. Stage one has, and they didn't even write it out. Stage one has theta waves. Stage one sleep. Stage two waves has theta waves plus sleep spindles and K complexes. That's what you see like right here, that little like scratchy. I think that's a sleep spindle. And then these big ones right here are K complexes, I'm pretty sure. But you don't have to know that. Like I said, you don't have to interpret an EEG. Basically, all you have to know is that stage two has theta waves that are interrupted by sleep spindles and K complexes. And what those are is those K complexes are where it's kind of starting to go into a slow delta wave. Once it gets to stage three, that's when you see delta waves mixed in. with theta waves. And then stage 4, you have pretty much entirely delta. So that's your stages of sleep and the wave patterns that are associated with them. So you can see how each one has different EEG. What an EEG is they attach things to your brain and then they measure the electrical wavelengths that are kind of coming off of it as you're in different stages of sleep. Another thing, relaxation. They will give it to you in the way of meditation, hypnosis. Those are really relaxed states. And that's when you see alpha waves. When you're entirely awake, like me and John are now, you have beta waves. So memorize just the waves because you'll be asked, you won't be shown an EEG. You'll be set. It'll say, we see alpha waves. What stage of sleep is this person likely in, or what stage of consciousness is this person likely in? You can say they're meditating, or they're very relaxed, or they haven't fallen asleep yet, but they might soon, or something like that. John, you got anything else to say about this? Like I said, it's not super high yield.
You killed it.
Awesome. So reportings of brainwave activity revealed that the participants in the S groups spent the most time in the stage of sleep, characterized by sleep spindles. This observation indicates that they're in what stage of sleep. So simplification of this is going to be, pause. The simplification is probably going to be like, what stage of sleep has sleep spindles? And that's stage 2, if you'll remember, right here. So like I said, they're gonna ask you in a very straightforward way. These are not going to be hard questions, but I put them on here so I want y'all to get those easy points. All right, John, that was the last thing. Anything else before we head off?
I think that was it.
All right. Well, we appreciate y'all taking the time out of your day to watch this application session, and hopefully it'll help you in the psych section of your actual MCAT.